I'm so excited to have Trevor Loudon again for a conversation this afternoon about his upcoming book. It's going to be part 3 of House Un-Americans. And Trevor Loudon is an amazing researcher. He's promising us 6 full volumes of House Un-Americans. It's a tremendous series. And part 1 is available at trevorloudon.com. Part 2 is now available at trevorloudon.com. And then part 3 is upcoming. And to read from part 2 of House Un-Americans, I like this introduction because the more I learned about the man, the more he was vindicated. You write the inscription: to Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, Republican of Wisconsin, one of the most maligned and unappreciated patriots to ever serve in the U.S. Senate. Thank you, sir, for your courageous service to your country and to the cause of human liberty. May history one day redeem you. It's truly a moving invocation for part 2. And where would you like to begin in terms of a description of your work, your new works coming out, Mr. Loud?
Yeah, well, thanks, Wes. See, most Americans are voting in elections and they have no idea of the real background of the people they vote for. They just have the media persona. And most Americans assume that Congress members who serve on high-powered committees like intelligence or armed services or education or homeland security are vetted and vetted and vetted. Well, there is no vetting in the US Congress at all. So you have to get a security clearance to work in the Department of Homeland Security, but not to chair the Homeland Security Committee in Congress. So the series of books is profiling between 90 and 100 currently serving US Congress members, exposing their communist, globalist, Islamist, socialist ties, their ties to North Korea, their ties to Cuba, their ties to China, and the policies that they're implementing that are basically put there by our enemies to destroy this country. So what I'm saying is between 90 and 100 Congress members who couldn't pass any form of background check are working for the enemies of America, and you won't hear that from the FBI. You won't hear that from the media. You have to read House Un-Americans from trevorloudon.com to understand the depth of the problem.
Yeah, it's astonishing to think that we've got from Southern California alone a whole list of names, including Salud Carvajal, Raul Ruiz, Judy Chu, Adam Schiff is a strange, but the names go on and on. These people are in the House of Representatives. I like the point where you say, in one of your interviews, you said that they would not qualify to drive a school bus. Why would they be working in Congress? Because these people have ties to communism. Their backgrounds have full of question marks, links to Iran. I'm just thinking of all of these weird coincidences. It's rather like you need an ID to get a fishing license, but you don't need an ID to vote. Well,
yeah. Well, this is all designed to now enable our enemies to get more influence. So you just mentioned Judy Chu. Well, she was a long-time supporter of the Communist Workers' Party. Now she runs the Chinese communities of Southern California for the Chinese Communist Party. Adam Schiff, who is going on and on and on about Russia collusion, at the same time he was working with the Committee of 100, Communist China's main influence operation in America, and nobody called him on it. And then he says he's a great friend of Israel, but he's working with the Muslim Political Action Committee, which is full of communists and jihadis. But he is working with these people, working with the Chinese, but telling everybody he loves America and he loves Israel. But he's working with the enemies all the time, while serving as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and slandering for 2 years a sitting president, and nobody called him on his communist connections because nobody either knows or the media will cover for him. So that's why I write the book, so people can actually see the reality behind the screen.
Could it be that, I mean, in what world is it really possible that the media doesn't understand that just performing a simple check would reveal that this individual was involved in promoting communist activities, Chinese communist activities? I mean, but of course, as I think we've discussed in previous meetings, there's two communist groups working out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the state of Minnesota, and not a lot of people realize that, you know, the Shining Path, I think, is one of them, but they're Maoist communist groups.
Yeah.
In Minnesota.
Well, it's very interesting that Peter Schweitzer, in his new book Blood Money, has revealed, and I revealed this first, that the Freedom Road Socialist Organization is the Maoist pro-Chinese communist group that started all of the George Floyd riots.
Yeah.
And their sister group called Liberation Road was the one that helped to steal the election. So one Chinese group started the riots and ran them all over America, and the other pro-Chinese group harvested the uprising, the young disaffected black kids who hated Trump and was told that Republicans were racist, the young Latino kids, and did massive voter registration drives in the inner cities of 7 key states. And this is what, so they caused the riots, the Chinese caused the riots, then they used the discontent of those riots to mobilize the youth of color in certain key states to swing the election. Like in Wisconsin, they had a group called Black Leaders Organizing Communities. In Pennsylvania, it was Pennsylvania Stands Up. In Arizona, it was Lucha. In Michigan, it was Detroit Action. In Georgia, it was the New Georgia Project. These are all Chinese-connected groups that stole the election, basically. And after another Chinese group had caused rioting all over the country and killed people and did billions of dollars worth of damage. So this is happening now, and we don't hear about it because our politicians and our media cover for it. But my books are a source of information, but also Peter Schweitzer's new book, Blood Money. You know, he's done books on the Clintons. He's a very credible writer.
Interesting. Blood Money by whom again?
Peter Schweitzer.
Peter Schweitzer.
He did the book on the Clintons, the Clinton crime family, and he's done several others as well. He's very, very, very good writer. And, you know, New York Times bestseller and all this kind of thing.
That's amazing. Encyclopedic knowledge of these individuals. Your books are more of a reference material than something that one would read cover to cover. Sometimes I find myself picking up one of your books, Enemies Within, to find a reference to Amy Klobuchar, so I could learn more about Senator Klobuchar, for example.
That's what I do. There's a little bit of narrative. There is narrative in there, and there's explanations of the groups and how they work and who they work for. But basically, you get the book and you look at your local congressman and you say, "Oh, I didn't know that Maxwell Frost, who says he's not a socialist, is a member of Democratic Socialists of America. I didn't know he's working with pro-Palestinians. I didn't know that Darren Soto was working with 2 different Maoist groups, plus hanging around with CARE, which is a front for Hamas." You know, and when I get to Minnesota in the series, you know, you'll be looking at Betty McCollum, obviously Ilhan Omar, but they won't be the only ones. You know, you've got a few of them in Minnesota. You'd be surprised to hear that. I'm sure. Wes.
dry humor of that's fantastic. Good point. Yeah, I would be very surprised because Ilhan Omar comes up again and again with her ties to Council on American Islamic Relations and the whole group, Jelani Hussein and Yeah, we've talked before about Muhammad Hakim, aka Attorney General Keith Ellison, but also
Well,
increasingly, our mayor of our city just got back from a successful, massive trip to China, and we can't find out what's.
Jacob Frey, was he in China? Was he?
Oh yeah, yeah. Was it's Mayor Kimberly Norton, and
On Rochester. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. The other why they're always taking our politicians to China. I guess they are saying that China is the new model. And forgive me, but I've no desire to be like China. Anyone who's, I mean, let's just say she's come back and people are trying to say, well, who did you meet with and who paid for your trip and why were you there and what in what context were you representing the third largest city in Minnesota? But at the same time, I was going to talk about the Islamist connection vis-a-vis, and I hate that expression, but Isaiah Minnesota is one of the groups that we have that has statewide chapters, but Isaiah Minnesota will actually filibuster our local city council meetings with activists that they bring in to push out initiatives on behalf of the DFL or the Democrat Party in Minnesota. So the head of the committee level of the DFL will pay for Olivia Bergen to come in and coordinate speakers on the microphone to push for initiatives. That's the key word, initiatives, and things that they reimagined. That term reimagine always comes up again and again.
Yeah.
There's that close connection, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Isaiah is very closely linked to Liberation Road, which are the pro-Chinese communists that gave us Black Lives Matter. And in Minnesota, they work seamlessly with the DFL. See, the DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the Farmer Labor part of it was set up by the Communist Party in the 1930s and then affiliated with the Democrats, and it has been heavily infiltrated by Democratic Socialists of America, Communist Party USA, etc., which is why Minnesota is as left-wing as it is. And it really started to go left-wing under Paul Wellstone back in the early 2000s, who was deeply connected to Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist group. But how many people in Minnesota do you think realize Paul Wellstone was a Marxist? You think many people understand? He was about to run for president, but he's a Marxist.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And he was very much like a populist Marxist. It was strange that he had that crossover power. He
was sort of Bernie Sanders before Bernie Sanders, but he trained Klobuchar. Klobuchar was his protege. Klobuchar was deeply connected to Democratic Socialists of America in the Wellstone movement. But then Tim Walz came out of the Wellstone movement, used to teach at the Wellstone School, and so did Peggy Flanagan, and so your Lieutenant Governor, and so did your Attorney General, Keith Ellison. All of them came out of this Marxist Wellstone movement. But how many people in Minnesota understand this? They think they're voting for the DFL, they're voting for DSA, they're voting for the communists.
And there's really no Democrats left in the DFL, no farmers left in the DFL, and no laborers left in the DFL. There's a bunch of layabouts, but no laborers in the DFL. Sorry.
But it is. DFL is now a Marxist party, which is why Minnesota's going the way it is. But you've got all these good, nice Minnesota people who think they're still voting for Hubert Humphrey or somebody, or whatever. But they're not. They're voting for full-on Marxists, and these Marxists collaborate with people like the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which burnt a whole chunk of Minnesota during the George Floyd riots, a whole chunk of it. But did any of them get punished? No, because they are the military wing of the DFL. That's what they are. They do that. And sometimes they upset the DFL, and sometimes they embarrass Jacob Frey or whatever. But they won't crack down on them because these are their soldiers.
Yeah,
these are the people they use to get their way. So
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Let me try to start it back up again, because I kind of stepped up. Absolutely, because the DFL, I've been tracking some of the payments that are made to the nonprofits, such as Isaiah Minnesota and one of their sister groups. It's a new one. It's called Faith in Minnesota. Faith in Minnesota is a strange name for a group because it's not just a biblical name like Isaiah. Faith in Minnesota seems to supplant a God with the state. So it's
yeah,
statism, right? Faith
yeah.
in Minnesota, right? So
Yeah, you got to understand. A lot of the churches, there's a left-wing Christian movement. It's a Marxist Christian movement. One of the top women in faith in America was a Communist Party USA member. You know, or I can never say Margarita Jorge, Communist Party USA, top woman in faith in America, which is a parent body of, I believe, faith in Minnesota. So, but Minnesota is a very Christian state. You know, a lot of churchgoers and whatever. So anything with faith in it, well, that's got to be just great. So
right.
if a faith group is going to your city council and asking for special subsidies for illegal immigrants, or a whole bunch of money for their latest little project, wow, these are faith leaders. Wow, this must be great. They are Marxists. They're using faith as they'll use anything else. You know, the environmental movement is Marxist, but how many greenies know that? You know, the Black Lives Matter was a Chinese communist operation, but how many Minnesota black people understand that? The illegal immigration movement is a Marxist movement, but how many people in Minnesota understand that they're being flooded with illegal immigrants to basically revolutionize their state, so they can never ever vote the DFL out of power ever again.
Right.
You know, to set up a one-party state in your state.
With racial grievances and then faith-based action, the permanent underclass that they're bringing in, they want to have like another layer of people who are disaffected and will be acting as revolutionaries against the state. So
Yeah.
the communists will find whatever's dominant or prevalent in a society to try to infiltrate it and then subvert it. So, like you say, Minnesota is very Christian, so they infiltrate the churches. And that's what we've seen happening at our city council meetings, is that they'll find these, sort of soft left-wing pastors. Some of them might not understand the extent to which they are tools of faith in Minnesota or tools of Isaiah Minnesota, but they'll speak at city council meetings in favor of policies that the activist, the DFL activist like Olivia Bergen, who, I looked into the finances. She's getting $2,000 checks 3 times a month from the highest level of the party, the DFL party in Minnesota. So that's a lot of money for anybody, much less someone who has a little gift of gab. But there she is at city council meetings and bringing in pastors, and they all sign up to speak about how we need this program to solve our problems. But of course, there again, they created the crisis. The Hegelian dialectic is they create.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's like the Chinese gave us COVID, but then they gave us a response to COVID. Then they managed the response. It had to be lockdowns, it had to be masks, it had to be vaccines. So they give us a disease, and then they manage the response. It's like the Chinese created Black Lives Matter, but when Blinken, the Secretary of State, met the Chinese in Alaska, they gave him a hard time because the blacks in America were revolting, and obviously because the people were treating the blacks so, with so much racism. But they started Black Lives Matter, and then they blame us for the effects of it.
And the Black Lives Matter leadership was communist trained, and they had that in their own documentation for Black Lives Matter, being communist trained. They wanted the destruction of the nuclear family. The Black American family is already under stress and already being disintegrated on purpose to destabilize the black family. And
I think most black people in America want greater family stability. But Black Lives Matter, which is supposedly their champion, explicitly states in their Marxist doctrine they want to get rid of the nuclear family. Well, but how many black people who supported Black Lives Matter realize that? How many white people who supported Black Lives Matter realize that? So this is a whole thing. You know, after Trump got elected, 1 million women marched in Washington with funny pink hats on, right?
Right,
now,
right.
I would say 95% of those women were not communists, but the top 5% who led it absolutely were. Judith LeBlanc and others, Communist Party USA. That was a communist gathering. But they just bring in all these useful idiots to bring up the numbers. Most union guys in Minnesota have no idea that every major union in Minnesota is now communist run. Right. But if you talk to some union guy, he's probably an NRA member, he likes to go hunting, he might be a veteran, he's probably a patriot, but he's given his union dues to the communists every week.
Yeah, yeah. And with the new book coming out, wait, let me talk about the first two books before we get on to the new book, because you reminded me of some documentation about Mr. Salud Carbajal.
Yeah, from California.
This guy looks like a gun-toting kind of union, hardworking guy. Probably his dad was a real sincere, like hardworking person. His mother raised 8 children. I mean, that's a real love of life. But
yeah,
it's a life embracing, life affirming. You know, this is a family unit, right? And but
Marine. He was a U.S. Marine.
Yeah, he's a U.S. Marine Corps for 8 years, and he looks like an overall great guy. And I'm confused because he's got these high-ranking positions, and then he serves on all of these great organizations, but then all of a sudden he seems to have these strange socialist connections.
Yeah.
So 2 decades worth of involvement with the California socialist movement based out of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara County Action Network. And when you hear that, the word action is almost always like, we need more gimme that's.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we thinking that the people try to make it to an extent and then shake it so they can break it? Are people trying to get like infiltrated? Like they don't? What would make someone join the Marine Corps, go that far, and then quit after 8 years and become a leftist?
Well, that's right. But maybe he was already a leftist in college, because I believe he went to college before the Marine Corps. And we're finding a lot of leftists, like Pete Buttigieg, for instance, are going to the military to give themselves a little bit of conservative credibility, you know, but they are leftists. And we've got to understand there are a lot of leftists in the military now. But Carbajal was involved with people from the League of Revolutionary Struggle, the pro-Chinese communists, and he just went in a delegation to Cuba at the end of last year, meeting with high-level communist Cuban officials. But if you look at him, as you say, 1 of 8 kids, Marine Corps, you think this is a normal guy, wouldn't you? You'd think he's a guy you'd like to have a beer with or something. But he's a hardcore Marxist who works incredibly closely with Democratic Socialists of America in Santa Barbara and all sorts of radical socialists and communists pushing their programs. So you can't always judge a book by its cover or the background, you know?
That's the really astonishing thing, that they effectively pivot and turn around to suddenly turn up in an unexpected place. I mean, like Cuba.
It's like Amy Klobuchar. She's Mrs. Nice Minnesota, right? She's just she even ran for president. But when she was a young girl, her alcoholic communist father used to take her for bicycle tours of the Soviet Union. So she'd be biking around the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War before going to college and working with all these Marxist professors, then working with Wellstone and Democratic Socialists of America, and working with Freedom Road as well, who burnt large chunks of Minnesota in the George Floyd riots. But she's Mrs. Nice Minnesota. You know, it's like Obama said, I'm a Christian who doesn't believe in gay marriage. That's what he said to get elected, and he completely reneged on all of that when he was in power.
And when we're talking about Carbajal, it's weird to go to Cuba, have high-level talks with the Cuban government, but meanwhile, we don't allow the patriot Cubans to come on into the United States.
Yes.
It's like Cubans love America once they get here. It's like they are riding these little boats to try to get away from their farmland they were raised on. They're trying to come into America, but the Cubans get rejected, whereas anybody who's a leftist or a radical, if you haven't had that experience with full tilt communism or socialism yet, come on in, because you're ripe for the picking by the communists.
Yeah, well, isn't that interesting? When Cubans had their riots against the communist government, when a bit of help from America would have overthrown that communist Cuban government, they were explicitly told by the US government, don't come here, because the government didn't want anti-communists, but yet they will welcome millions of refugees from the third world. The Biden has flown planes to other countries to bring 380,000 people here, but not anti-communists, not the Cubans. The one group that we should have welcomed here, because they would have stood with us. You know, there's many Cuban Americans have served in the US military, the CIA, with great distinction, because they understand communism. They understand how valuable the freedom we have here is. So we didn't want those people.
Right.
But all the people are going to vote Democrat, because those people would have voted Republican and they would have been conservatives. Well, we don't want them. You know, look, if most of the people coming across the southern border were Republicans, how long do you think it would be before Joe Biden had the biggest fence on the border you've ever seen?
Right. That's right. Well, this is a good point to end on for segment one, and I hope we can have a part two, time permitting. Staying under 30 minutes helps the algorithm so that more people will be introduced. Trevor?
Yep.
Okay. A phone call came in at that point, and then my telephone just took over and put you on hold. I apologize. I wanted to say again, TrevorLoudon.com is where you can find his books and films, and TrevorLoudon.com is where you can find Trevor Loudon's upcoming possibly speaking events. And you can, if you communicate with that website directly, you can help bypass the Amazon.com algorithm, although his books and materials are also available on Amazon.com, and we'll provide the links to Trevor Loudon's. Go ahead, sir.
Just going to say, a lot of people like their books to be signed, personally signed, and you can do that if you get them through my site. Well, Jeff Bezos isn't going to individually sign all of my books for me. So if you want them signed, go through my website, but you can get them through Amazon as well.
That's a great point to make, because we really want to see the inscription in the front of the book. It's special to have your name written in there. And thank you, sir. And let's end this for now, because we're coming up just on 30 minutes. And I will hopefully see you in part two. And thank you.